The night it broke, the city wore rain like a bad memory. Neon smeared down the glass, traffic hissed, and Hannah stood in her kitchen with the kind of stillness that comes after a long argument with yourself. The clock on the stove blinked 1:12. Her husband hadn't answered in hours. The ring on her finger felt heavier than metal. A message landed on her phone with the precision of a knife. You don't deserve to be hidden. A photo followed, Minji's profile in a restaurant window, a woman's reflection angled toward him, 2 wineglasses duplicated in the glass. No names, no caption. The truth didn't need one. Hannah pressed her thumb to the counter until it hurt. She'd spent 10 years learning how to breathe around his absences, telling herself the story every dutiful heart tells. He's busy, he's stressed, he's trying. She had accepted dinners gone cold and promises packaged for later. She had walked beside him like a shadow someone forgot to notice. Tonight, the shadow looked back. The front door opened on the second try. Min-jae stood there with hair slicked by rain and a smile he forgot to finish. He smelled like someone else's cologne pretending to be the night. "You're awake," he said. "I learned from you." She held the phone up. The photo made the space between them smaller and colder. Who is she? He looked at the image only long enough to know denial wouldn't stick. His mouth moved like a man shaping a story in air. "A client. It's complicated." Hannah laughed. One small, astonished sound. "It's always complicated when you make it so." 10 years of tiny concessions lined up behind her like ghosts waiting to be counted. The last concession stepped forward. She took off the ring and set it on the counter with a sound that was almost nothing and somehow the loudest thing in the room. "I'm filing," she said. A muscle ticked in his jaw. He looked past her at the life they had arranged into an acceptable picture frame. 2 mugs, a plant that wanted more light, a pair of running shoes she'd bought on sale. "You can't mean that." "I don't have to mean it," Hannah said. "I only have to do it." He reached for her, then stopped, then let his hand fall. "Hannah!" The rain over the city found a new rhythm. A flash of light turned the window into a mirror and Hannah saw herself. Eyes she did not recognize, a mouth that had learned to say yes when it wanted to say wait. Something in her legs wanted to run before her heart could change its mind. "I need air," she said, and the door closed on whatever he said next. Outside, the rain didn't ask questions. It pressed itself into her hair and along her collar and made the night honest. She walked without choosing a direction, shoes taking water, phone heavy in her pocket. At the corner, the crosswalk sign blinked its red hand like a warning from a kinder universe. Hannah stood under a bus shelter with 2 strangers and the shared knowledge that the weather didn't care. Her body decided before her thoughts did. The edges of the world turned pale. Her knees gave a small, surprised bend. Someone said, "Miss," as if names mattered. The city tilted. A smear of white. The sound of rain slowed. Then nothing. When she woke, the rain had changed its voice. It sounded closer, thinner, like fingers drumming on tin. A ceiling she did not own stared down at her, yellowed at one corner where a leak had once been forgiven. Air smelled like instant coffee and laundry detergent. Her body recognized the place before her mind did. She sat up too fast. The room held its breath with her. A narrow bed, a metal rack with 4 hangers, a desk the size of a promise, a tiny kitchenette with a single stubborn burner. A mirror leaned against the wall and returned a face she hadn't seen in 10 years. Softer at the edges, less careful, hair cut in a way she used to call practical because pretty cost time she didn't have. Her hand flew to her ring finger. There. The skin there had no memory of weight. Her phone lay face down on the floor beside the bed. Hannah picked it up. The lock screen woke to a date that made no sense. 10 years earlier. She stared until numbers became shapes and shapes became a tide that tried to pull her under. Notifications from a world-long archive stacked on top of each other. Orientation reminders from the hospital. A discount from the convenience store near the bus stop. A message from her mother with too many heart emojis. Eat before night shift. I left kimchi soup. Love you. Hannah pressed a hand to her chest and felt a bird change direction. The room was not an accident. It was the studio she had lived in when she believed in mornings. The chipped mug on the shelf said good things take time in letters that had peeled at the edges from too many washes. On the desk, a notebook weighted with a mechanical pencil laid across it like an invitation. She stood slowly, as if the floor might disagree. The world held. The mirror didn't lie. She touched the room like you touch a person you have missed and are afraid to startle. Lightly, apologetically. At the window, Rain fidgeted on a view of the alley she had memorized. The cracked brick, the cat that owned the dumpster, the neighbor's bicycle chained to a pipe it had outlived. Hannah let the timeline unfurl. 10 years earlier meant Min-jae was not yet the man who learned to be absent. He was the boy with a notebook full of plans and shoes that squeaked in the library. He was the student who borrowed her umbrella and returned it on a day without rain because he wanted to see if she would smile the same way twice. He was all the beginnings before the endings made themselves thieves. Memory ran a finger down her spine. Fear followed, and then, carefully, something like hope. Her phone buzzed again, innocent with history. On-call swap? Can you take tonight? She typed with hands that remembered how to be fast. I can. The simplicity of being helpful steadied her. She dressed the way she used to dress when money did most of the deciding. Plain jeans, a clean tee, the blue cardigan with the mended elbow. The hospital badge on the hook by the door showed a photo where her eyes had that untamed brightness she had taught herself to dim. Outside, rain grinned down the alley. The morning had decided to be gray. Hannah walked with the care of someone new to gravity. At the corner, the convenience store's neon open had the same fragile bravery it always did. She pushed the door and bell glass rang. Fluorescent light tried to be kind and failed. The young clerk lifted a hand without looking up. She reached for onigiri and coffee, old habits reloaded. When she turned, the door opened and a gust of wet air brought a shape she could have recognized in complete darkness. Min-jae shook rain from his hair with the absent-minded efficiency of a person used to meetings he was always late to. He wore a jacket one size too big and carried a folder that had been opened often enough to grow soft at the corners. He looked younger because the world had not yet taught him to count love in margins. His eyes found hers with the untheatrical surprise of a light switching on. He smiled, the real one, the one that came before he learned how to pose. Hannah! Her name in his mouth stepped over 10 years like they were puddles. Every muscle in her body remembered the choreography of the first time. How to beam, how to hurry, how to accept whichever version of tomorrow his certainty offered. The choreography waited. She did not move. Hi, she said, and the word landed exactly where she wanted it to. Steady, warm, not a door and not a surrender. You're up early. He glanced at the coffee in her hand. The badge clipped to her pocket, the clock above the gum aisle. Night shift. Sometimes, she said. Sometimes I save the tired for later. He laughed, small and honest. I'm on my way to the library. Big exam. Try not to faint when I say the word econometrics. I won't faint, Hannah said, but I might yawn. He tilted his head, pleased by the shape of the conversation. Do you want? He gestured toward the hot water machine and the row of paper cups. Ramen? I owe you from last time. You spotted me when my card died, and I almost married you on the spot out of gratitude. Last time. In the old sequence, she had said yes because yes was easy and pleasing was a muscle she could work without thinking. In the old sequence, this tiny kindness would grow into a vine around both their throats. She could feel it already, the old gravity trying to reassert itself, the part of her that wanted to skip to the good scene without reading the terms. Hannah looked at his face and saw the boy he was and the man he might be and the man he had been. Love was not the problem. The absence of other things had been. I can't, she said gently, and watched his eyebrows lift before she softened the refusal with a gift. But I'd walk with you to the library. 10 minutes. You can tell me why econometrics is a romantic tragedy. He laughed again. It is. Everyone suffers and no one understands why. They stepped back onto the street under a sky rehearsing grief. He held his folder against his chest and tried for charm. She listened the way a person listens to music they once loved but now hears differently. He reached to take the coffee from her hand and she let him. And when their fingers touched, she noticed how simple electricity felt when no one tried to own it. At the library steps, Min-jae paused. "Thanks for the walk. Thanks for the lecture," she said. "I feel smarter and sadder. Wait." He rummaged in his folder and pulled out a pen that had been chewed at the cap. Proof of honest thinking. He flipped a note card and scribbled, "My number. For, academic emergencies." She took the card and did not give him hers. He noticed. He pretended not to. "Hannah?" he said. "Yes. I'm glad I ran into you." "I'm glad I ran into me too," she said, and watched him file the puzzle away for later. He tapped the railing twice the way he used to when he was nervous and jogged up the steps. At the door, he looked back. She lifted her coffee in a small salute and turned before nostalgia could write the next line. Rain made the morning clean. Hannah walked until the hospital came into view, until the automatic doors breathed her in, until the familiar scent of antiseptic and stubborn hope did what it always did. Ask for the best part of her and offer something steady in return. In the locker room, she opened her notebook and wrote a title on the first page in block letters. Rewrite love rules. 1. No lies you tell yourself to make someone else comfortable. 2. Boundaries are not punishments. 3. Choose the life first, then the person who fits it. 4. Don't repeat what hurt you because you're afraid to change what saved you. 5. If he wants to stay, he will stand in the light. She underlined the last one twice. Somewhere between the ink and the rain, fear loosened its jaw. Her phone buzzed. A new message landed like a coin in a jar. "Did you get to work okay? If you have time later, I found a cafe with quiet tables. M." She read it once and then again and let herself smile as if the day belonged to her. She typed an answer that did not promise and did not shut the door. "Good luck on your exam. Tell me one thing you learned today." She slipped the phone into her pocket and tied her hair back and stepped onto the ward where time didn't always behave but people tried to anyway. The world hadn't changed, but she had turned her face toward a different version of it. Outside, rain drew soft lines across the window. Inside, Hannah reached for the first chart of the day and chose herself before anything else. Days arranged themselves into careful, deliberate choices. Hannah learned how to move through them without letting momentum decide. She swapped a brutal night shift for an earlier one so she could make the morning quiet belong to her. She replaced the habit of saying yes with the practice of pausing. She kept the notebook in her bag and the rules on the first page like a compass she could touch without looking. Min-jae texted exactly what she had asked for. "One thing I learned today, models fail when they assume people don't." She smiled into the break room's humming light and answered between chart notes. "People fail. They also change." They saw each other again because the city liked to pretend it was big while arranging small coincidences. He waited outside the hospital with 2 paper cups and no assumptions. They walked to a park that underestimated winter and sat on a damp bench like stubborn optimists. He talked about classes and a professor who taught as if the world were an equation too elegant to belong to them. She talked about patients who refused to be statistics. "Let's make a pact," he said suddenly. "The way you say something before fear edits it." He took a napkin from his pocket as if courage came printed in brown. 90 days. No lies. No disappearing. Once a week. We meet and say the thing we're tempted to hide. Hannah looked at him the way you look at a bridge and decide to trust it. "And if the truth isn't pretty, then we learn to love it before it becomes uglier." He wrote on the napkin with a pen that jerked when the wind moved his hand. "No lies. No ghosting. Weekly truths. If late or scared, say so." He slid the napkin to her and waited. She added one line. "Stand in the light together." His breath left him like something he had been carrying too long. Deal. The pact wasn't romantic in the way movies are romantic. It was romantic in the way maintenance is romantic. It built a thing rather than assuming it would appear. They kept it the way people keep promises they intend to be proud of. There were small scenes that could have pretended to be ordinary if you squinted. A corner table at a cafe with too few outlets. Library desks where elbows brushed without taking more than they were given. 2 bowls of late-night ramen steaming in a narrow restaurant that smelled like rain and stubborn business. He walked her to a bus stop and stood under the scratched plexiglass as if it were a cathedral. She taught him the cheapest way to fold dumpling wrappers so they didn't burst. He taught her a trick for memorizing terms that used a melody so dumb she couldn't forget it. He tried charm on her and found it didn't move anything unless it was attached to honesty. The absence of performance made space for attention. The more he paid it, the more she let him. At the end of the first month, he handed her a small box with the grave nervousness of a person who knows gifts can be weapons. "It's not what you think," he said. "Open it." Inside lay a thin silver band, simple enough to be mistaken for nothing, sturdy enough to hold meaning without announcing it. "It's not a proposal," he said. "It's a placeholder. For work we're agreeing to do. For time. I don't want to hurry you into a story we'll just have to rewrite." Hannah turned the ring between her fingers and felt the difference in weight between this and the future she had once carried. "And if the work fails? Then it's a gift we return to the box," he said. "No interest charged." She placed the ring on her right hand, the one she wrote with. "Then it's a promise to write better." For a second, the world allowed a quiet victory. It shaped itself into a version of the past where the worst parts had been edited out and the best parts had been remastered. Hannah slept easier. She woke more willing. The city looked less like a test and more like a series of doors. But loops don't break just because you ask them to. It began with a man Hannah did not yet know how to name in this timeline. He was not Minji's uncle the way family trees define the word, but he had known Minji's father when knowing a man meant knowing what he owed. He found Minjae outside the library and shook his hand like a contract. He spoke about opportunity, about a position that would skip 3 lines of waiting, about an advance that would turn a semester into air. "I can't say yes," Minjae said, proud of the refusal like a boy proud of his first swing. "I'm doing it the long way." The man smiled the way storms smile when they see a roof they like. "No rush," he said, and left him a card that felt heavier than paper. Hannah didn't know about the card. She noticed other things. Minjae arrived late to their weekly truth and she had to ask twice to get the words. He said he was overwhelmed and she believed him because school stood over people like weather. He answered her text with a dot, then a sentence, then nothing. She told herself not to make shapes out of silence. At the cafe, the same woman from the first timeline, Sujin, who wore friendship like a hobby and gossip like a job, found Hannah at the sugar station and tilted her head in a way that pretended care. "I heard Minjae might be taking on a mentorship," Sujin said, stirring nothing. "It's very intense. They say the mentor is influential." Hannah looked at her spoon and saw her reflection ripped into silver lines. "If you're worried, ask him," she said. "I'm sure he'd love to clear your schedule of rumors." Sujin smiled with her teeth. "You got stronger," she said, as if surprise should be thanked. "I stopped lifting other people's excuses," Hannah said, and left her standing in a sweetness she hadn't earned. That night, Hannah found a folded sheet in Minji's bag when he passed her the notebook she'd left at his place. It wasn't a violation. He had handed the bag to her while he rummaged for keys, and the paper slipped free. A payment schedule stared up at her. Numbers pretending to be rescue. The name at the top was not a bank. She put the paper back where it had fallen and breathed until her heart did not try to climb her throat. Then she waited the way you wait beside a bed until a patient is ready to answer the question you have to ask. At their weekly truth, she sat across from him in a booth that forgave poor posture and lit his face like a confession. She placed her palm on the table and left it there. Not an offer, not a threat, an anchor. "Is there something you need to say where I can see it?" she asked. He looked at her and hated that she deserved an immediate answer. He searched for a soft version of a hard fact and found none that didn't sound like lying. "It's just a possibility," he said. "Someone offered to open a door. If I step through, I can take care of things faster. For us." "Who asked for faster?" Hannah said. "Which part of us needs to be saved by a debt we can't explain?" "It's not a debt," he said too quickly. "It's an advance. Money is the same weight whatever you call it," she said, and surprised herself with how gently the words came. "What does the contract want from you?" He hesitated, and the hesitation answered for him. "Access," he said finally. "Introductions. A kind of loyalty. Public or private?" Does it matter? It always matters, she said. If it has to be hidden, it owns you twice. His jaw tightened. He reached across the table, then stopped the way he had in another kitchen in another life. Hannah, this is me trying. I'm tired of watching you work too hard for everything. I'm tired of being the reason you can't buy new shoes. You're not the reason, she said. And even if you were, I don't want a solution that looks like the problem in nicer clothes. He pulled the thin ring from his pocket and turned it between his fingers the way she had once done. I thought this meant we were building. It does, she said, and slid the ring back across to him, not with finality, with care. This is a blueprint. We don't pour concrete in the dark. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of the version of their life that had almost learned something. It was full of his pride and her fear and the strange, tender respect that grows when two people refuse to be less than they promised. Tell me no, he said, and the boy in him asked the question as if the answer could fix something broken long before her. No to secrets, she said. No to men who smile like storms. No to a door that only opens if I'm not allowed to see it. And to me, his voice was smaller than he meant it to be. To you, she said. Never. To your choices? Sometimes. He swallowed and nodded and didn't know what to do with his hands. He wanted to leave and stay and change and hide. He wanted to be the man who chose her in the light without losing the glass steps he had been climbing since he learned steps were the only way out. Hannah stood. I'm walking, she said softly, before we repeat what hurt us. Outside, rain had returned as if summoned by scenes like this. The bus shelter took her in without questions. The plexiglass held a smear of old stickers and a new heart someone had drawn with a thumb. Min-jae followed her out and stood a meter away like a person approaching the edge of a roof. Don't go, he said, and hated how much of a boy he sounded. I'm not disappearing, she said. I'm staying exactly where I said I'd be. In the light. If you want me, you'll stand there too. A bus moaned its way toward them, lights hazed by water. She stepped on and held the pole with a hand that didn't shake. He didn't climb after her. He stood in the rain and watched the windows fill with faces and then with his own reflection as the glass turned the city into moving water. The shelter emptied. The street gathered itself back into traffic and advertisements and steam lifting from grates like someone's tired magic. He reached into his pocket and closed his hand around the thin ring until the edge stung. He didn't put it back on the wrong finger. He didn't throw it away. He stood there and learned what consequence felt like when it wasn't punishment but instruction. Hannah rode until the route turned familiar, until the bus side near the store where she had learned the price of convenience and the cost of being found. She stepped into her studio and let the smallness hold her. She took the notebook from her bag and added a rule under the last one. The ink still wet from other hopes. 6. If the path asks for your silence, it is not your path. She closed the notebook and pressed her palm to the cover, feeling the quiet heartbeat of paper. Outside, rain stitched the alley to the night. Inside, she stood very still and realized stillness could be a kind of movement when you chose it. Her phone lit the room with a square of white. A message appeared without a name because the sender was already a fact. I said no. She read it twice and let the meaning settle where relief and caution share a border. Another message arrived, late and honest. I want to deserve the light. Hannah didn't answer yet. She set the phone down and looked out at the city that had watched her break and begin. Somewhere in it, a boy was deciding what kind of man he would become without borrowing anyone's weather. Somewhere in it, the future waited without tapping its foot. She turned off the lamp. The room kept its shape in the dark. The rain kept counting seconds. And in that counting, a loop loosened by another, almost invisible degree. Morning made a quieter promise than night ever did. Hannah brewed coffee the way she'd learned to measure, breathe, wait. Her phone face down on the table kept its square of silence. The last 2 messages, I said no. And I want to deserve the light. Glowed behind the black like a heartbeat that had decided to keep going. She left for the ward before the city remembered to hurry. In triage, a boy with a sprained wrist cried harder than his pain required. She let him. A grandmother refused a needle until Hannah held her hand and told her a story about a cat who survived a storm because it stayed where people could see it. Truth worked better than soothing when you said it gently. All day, she practiced the life she had chosen to have, whether or not love figured out how to fit inside it. Across town, Min-jae waited in a lobby that smelled like expensive apologies. The man everyone called a mentor arrived late and smiling, the kind of smile that wanted you to mistake it for weather. "You've thought it over," the man said, lowering himself into a chair as if the building belonged to him. "I have," Min-jae said. His voice belonged to him. "No." The man blinked once, as if the word didn't translate. "You misunderstand. I don't make offers twice." "I'm not misunderstanding," Min-jae said. "I'm declining. I don't want your introductions or the kind of loyalty that has to be hidden." The smile cooled by a degree. "You plan to climb the long steps while your peers take the elevator?" "I plan to build stairs," Min-jae said and stood. He placed the card back on the table. "If I arrive somewhere, I want to know how I got there." The man watched him leave with the expression of a person assessing a leak. Annoying now, disastrous later. By afternoon, a rumor sprouted in the easiest soil, group chats and feeds that preferred speed to accuracy. Golden boy gets secret backing. Intern nurse trades up. The kind of sentences that could ruin a day if you let them. Min-jae didn't. He wrote one post and only one, clean as a ledger balance to zero. "I declined private backing. I will be supporting myself with part-time work and scholarships I earn. If I thought an unseen debt could make me worthy of someone, I was wrong. I'm learning worth isn't borrowed. I won't be answering questions beyond this." He didn't name Hannah. He didn't have to. The post was about his weather, not hers. He went to the campus office and asked about assistantships like a man paying for a thing with hours. He took a night shift at the copy center and a tutoring block on Thursdays and felt tired in a way that didn't make him ashamed. Before he left, he pulled a chewed pen cap from his pocket, wrote 2 words on his palm, and circled them twice. Weekly Truths. At dusk, Rain returned to the city with the sincerity of an apology. A message slid into Hannah's phone like a small, folded note through a classroom door. "Roof at 8. If you want. No pressure. I'll stand there either way." The hospital roof was where nurses went to finish crying or to stop before they started. Hannah climbed the last flight and pressed the door with her shoulder. The rain was a soft, persistent curtain. Min-jae stood under the shallow overhang with his hands visible, as if he'd been told to approach a skittish animal. He didn't step forward. "Thank you for coming," he said. And when he said it, it sounded like gratitude instead of relief. "I almost didn't," she said. That felt important. It was. He took a breath big enough to matter. Weekly Truth. I wanted a shortcut because I'm afraid I'm only enough if I arrive fast. I said yes to that fear in my head before I said it to anyone. I don't want to be that man. The roof held the sound of rain the way a chest holds a secret. Hannah watched his mouth shape honesty and leaned against the wall to keep from moving toward him just because truth is pretty when it shows up wet and out of breath. "My turn," she said. Weekly Truth. I'm afraid love will ask me to dim again. I'm afraid I'll mistake sacrifice for devotion. I'm afraid of my own old habits. He nodded like she'd handed him a manual and he intended to read it. "I won't ask for your dim. If you do, you stop me." "I will," she said. "And if I fail to stop you, stop yourself." He almost smiled. Deal. They stood there with a meter of rain between them and the knowledge that a meter is a distance you can choose to keep or close. He reached into his pocket and brought out the thin ring. He didn't open his hand to offer it like a trick. He showed it the way you hold up a small tool you learned to use correctly at last. "This isn't leverage," he said. "It isn't a rescue. It's just a circle we draw around the work. If you don't want it, it goes back in the box and waits." Hannah stepped closer by inches. The city below them glittered like a patient trying. She lifted her palm. He laid the ring on it, and she felt its small gravity without mistaking it for fate. "Last time," she said quietly, "I wore something heavy and called it love. This time, I'll wear something light and call it practice." "Where?" he asked, and it wasn't a test. It was a question about where she wanted to carry their promise. She slid the ring onto her right hand again, the one she wrote with. On the hand that makes things. He exhaled in a way that made the rain sound different. I don't have a grand gesture, he said. Just this. I will not put us in rooms I can't show you. I will not call a cost opportunity. I will not make you hold the bill for my ambition. And I won't treat your ambition like a crime, she said. I won't ask you to be smaller so I can feel safer. I won't stay if we go dark. They looked at each other like people who had just signed a contract and realized it was a choice, not a trap. He reached up and touched her cheek with 2 fingers as if testing the weather. She didn't flinch. The underhang did its best to shelter them. The rain did its best to bless what it couldn't cover. Do we kiss now? He asked, embarrassed by the softness in his own voice. We could, she said. Or we could walk. Walk. He sounded like he was learning a new definition of romance. Downstairs, she said. In the open. Without hiding. Let the night see us before we do anything it has to pretend didn't happen. He laughed because she was right and because he had never wanted anything more than to learn how to be with her in the exact light they had agreed on. They took the stairs 1 flight at a time, a metaphor that refused to be subtle. On the street, the rain had slowed to something that made hair curl and signs shine. He opened his umbrella, a cheap black circle that made a small world, and held it over both their heads. They fit without touching. They walked that way for a block, then 2, then 3, as if the city were a treadmill they could practice future on. At the crosswalk, a car idled and the driver drummed the wheel, and the world pretended not to care. Min-jae turned the umbrella just enough so the water ran off the far edge instead of down her sleeve. The gesture was ordinary enough to be enormous. Weekly truth, he said, as if they hadn't just traded 2. I want to kiss you. Weekly truth, she said. I want you to earn it. He grinned, rain clinging to his lashes. I like our contract better than the old one. It's not a contract, she said, smiling back. It's a practice. They reached the small park that underestimated winter and stood beneath a tree that did its tired best to be romantic. He didn't ask again. She didn't stall. She put a hand on his chest to feel a rhythm secure enough to lean toward. When she lifted her face, it was not because the scene required it. It was because she wanted to. The kiss was quiet and precise. It landed like a signature you write slowly because you mean it. No fireworks. No witnesses. Just 2 people in the light they had chosen, becoming the story they were willing to work for. They parted with foreheads touching like punctuation. The city continued its negotiations with rain. Somewhere, someone complained about weather apps. Somewhere, an elevator carried other people past other stairs, and none of that had anything to do with them. Later, at her desk, Hannah opened her notebook and turned to the first page. Rewrite love rules. She added a date without writing the year because the year was an argument she intended to win with time. 7. Practice is better than promises. She flipped to the back and wrote a single line in steadier handwriting than she'd had 10 years ago. Day 91. Her phone buzzed. I found a cafe with quiet tables. Not a shortcut. Just good light. Good, she typed. Bring the dumb melody. I forgot 1 term on purpose. I'll stand in the light and sing badly, he wrote. Hannah smiled and put the notebook away. Outside, the rain didn't stop. It just changed its mind about how to fall. Inside, she changed her mind about what a loop had to be. When she stepped into the hallway, a nurse passing by glanced at the thin ring on her right hand and didn't ask. Some things deserve to be seen without being explained. Hannah walked toward the ward, where alarms would cry and infants would sleep and old men would argue kindly with breakfast. She touched the door, then her chest, then the door again, as if the building were a person she loved and was promising to return to. On the other side, the shift bell rang. The day began, and somewhere in the city, a boy grew into a man, one honest choice at a time.